The Russians set themselves up under Marxist presuppositions and tried to equalize the distribution of property, and to call that catastrophic barely scratches the surface. And I know that you guys probably don't learn much about this because for some reason people aren't taught about it, but you know, the good estimates are that the Russians killed about 30 million of their own people between 1919 and 1959, you know, and it's brutal. It's brutal. A lot of that was through starvation. You know, I saw a photograph the other day which I tweeted, which is the worst photograph I've ever seen in my life, and that's actually saying a lot because I've seen a lot of really terrible photographs because I've done so much investigation into totalitarianism. This was a photograph that was taken during one of the early starvation periods in the Soviet Union where about 3 million peasants died. It was a picture of a peasant couple standing behind a table at a market selling human body parts for food. It's like, and you know, I have this weird quirk which I don't think does me much good, but maybe helps me understand things better. When I see that someone has done something extreme, I learned to do this a long time ago when I worked briefly in a maximum security prison. I try to imagine what I would have to be like, what kind of situation I would have to find myself in to do that. And believe me, man, that's a horrifying enterprise, because it is actually possible, no matter what it is that you read about someone doing, and no matter how unlikely it is that you think you would do that, it's possible to imagine yourself in that situation. And that, well, that's enlightening. That's what I would say. That's enlightening. You know, because one of the things about enlightenment is that you get enlightened by doing things that are necessary that you really, really, really do not want to know, don't want to do. And imagining yourself as a perpetrator of that sort is, it tells you something about the world and it tells you something about human beings, but it's a hell of a thing to swallow, you know, and in a very well structured society like ours, where we're so peaceful, well, because we have the heat and it always works, and we have electricity and it always works, and we have plumbing, which is a bloody miracle, and it always works. You know, it's just one of the things that this imagination process has done for me is keep me alert to the absolute miracle that my life is every day. It's horribly cold out there. You can't grow any food. You'll die if you're out there for 24 hours. If any of this infrastructure was unreliable for any length of time, we would be in serious trouble. And it's never unreliable. It's so unlikely. And so here we are with all this reliable infrastructure. And because of that, we don't really have to compete with each other much. I mean, some. You don't compete for food. You don't compete for shelter, or some people do, but not very many. So it's really easy to think of yourself as good, because, well, you're not doing anything nasty to anyone. But, you know, a cynic might say, well, that's just because you don't have any reason to. But those reasons have arisen many times in the past, and in fact they're the norm, not the exception. We're the exception. This insanely functional society that we've somehow managed to generate it's incomprehensible to me that it exists. So anyways, back in the end of the Industrial Revolution, you know, the conditions of the worker were pretty brutal. I mean, George Orwell wrote a book called Road to Wigan Pier, which I would highly recommend. It's a great book. And he went up in the 30s, I think it was the 30s, to live with the coal miners up in northern UK. And those poor guys, you know, they had to crawl to work for 2 miles down a tunnel that they couldn't stand up in just to start their shift. And then after their 8 hours of, you know, hacking away at the coal walls, which is rather difficult and dirty and dangerous, and of course you get black lung from it, so it's also fatal, and of course they didn't get paid very much. So after doing that for 8 hours, then you crawled back your 2 miles, and you didn't get paid for that. That was just the commute. And the housing for those people was not good, the food wasn't good, most of them had no teeth by the time they were 30. You know, I mean, being poor was no joke, even in a place like the UK, which was relatively well off. And so there was every reason to be concerned about the disparity between rich and poor. And poor is the natural state, you know, that in the Western world in 1895 the typical person lived on $1 a day in today's dollars. And you know, that's not uncommon in many places in the world now. So there were reasons to be concerned with inequality.